Today we are talking about vintage wedding rings, and this discussion is brought to you by www.qualityvintageengagement.rings.com. Now, there is a difference between a vintage ring versus a vintage style, and so you need to make sure that you understand this if you're planning on purchasing a vintage wedding ring. A vintage ring is a true ring that dates back, years to when it was actually created. Many of these rings were created 50 or even up to 100 years ago, and they're old pieces. Whereas a vintage style ring is a modern ring that is designed to look like a vintage ring. It replicates the vintage style and the designs that were used in those vintage rings. So you have two options if you'd like a vintage wedding ring. Some people prefer to go with a true vintage ring because it has those unique characteristics and the story behind the ring. It's been around for years and years. Whereas some people choose to go with a vintage style ring instead, because then they can have a modern ring and be able to pick which stones they want to use and what kind of metal they would like, and it's more customizable if they go with a vintage style ring. So there's not really a right answer either way. It kind of just depends on what you want. If you want a classic ring that's been around for a long time, then you can go with a true vintage ring. But if you'd like something that's just your own that hasn't been worn before, then a vintage style wedding ring is a good choice for you. Now, there are 6 decorative periods that vintage rings get their style from, and that they come from. If you're going with a true ring, these rings were created during these decorative periods. And the decorative times range anywhere from like the 1700s up until like the 1950s or so. We don't have time to go through the details of each of those periods in this video, but you can get more information about each of these decorative periods on our website and the styles and characteristics that are unique to each of them. Just really quickly, there are the Georgian style, the Victorian style, Edwardian, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, and Retro style. And again, you can find more detailed information about that at our website, qualityvintageengagement.rings.com. But talking specifically about vintage wedding rings and how to buy them, of course, like I mentioned, you need to make sure that you decide if you want a true vintage ring or a replica. That's really the first step that you need to take, is to determine if you want to have a modern ring or an older ring. And then once you've decided if you're looking for a modern ring, from that point you can go and have it designed or find a design that matches what you like, or you can look for if you decide to go with a true vintage ring, you can begin looking at some of the antique stores and online. There are a lot of great resources online to buy a true vintage ring. As you're looking for the rings, decide on what style you would like. Pick out the decorative period that you prefer and find the characteristics that you like that match your personality. You really want to make sure that you get a ring that is you. There are a lot of options out there, but you can definitely find a ring that matches your personality and your own personal style. Additionally, when you are buying a vintage wedding ring, it's important to determine a budget. As with any large purchase that you make, this is going to be a significant purchase for you. So make sure to know ahead of time about how much you'd like to spend and what how much flexibility you have with that budget. And then if you are buying a vintage style wedding ring, you can choose the diamond and metal that you like. You have the ability to customize the ring, so think about what characteristics of a diamond is important to you, what type of metal you prefer, and then customize the ring to that. If you're buying a true vintage ring, you don't have the flexibility as much to choose the specific diamond and metal that you'd like, but you can at least keep it in mind as to what you're looking for so that you can narrow it down to specific types of rings that you're looking for. There is a lot of information about vintage rings. It's a big purchase, a big process trying to determine which ring is right for you. If you want more information about vintage rings, check out our website. We've got a lot of information about engagement rings and just vintage rings in general. And that website was www.qualityvintageengagement.rings.com.